Welcome back to the Rethinking podcast. In this episode, we talk with Florian Kern. He is the head of the research field Ecological Economics and the Environmental Policy at the Institute for Ecological Economy Research. We discuss ecological economics and talk about sustainable energy transitions. We also focus on what it takes to build a master's program. Which skills does a student need, and how do you decide what should be included in a master's program to teach them? Next to that, we discuss growth and many other topics. Dive in and rethink economics with us. We're happy to have you. Hi, Florian. It's so nice to meet you. So, what have you been working on?
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me today. Well, my name is Florian Kern. I'm based at the Institute for Ecological Economy Research, which is an independent research institute based in Berlin, Germany. And I'm directing a group of 15 people around here. We're focusing on ecological economics and environmental policy. So in my day-to-day, I'm very busy managing, of course, the group of people, anything from finances to kind of personnel matters. And of course, I'm also leading and working on exciting research projects. And other than that, I take part in senior leadership teams, team meetings, and try to shape the institute along with my colleagues. So yeah, overall, I'm very busy, but it's a brilliant job, and I really enjoy working here. I've been here for about 3 years, and before that, I've been based at the University of Sussex in Great Britain. So I've been there for about 12 years before that. So most of my academic experience was over there, and now I'm back in where I'm originally from.
Okay. So, how did you do research there, or did you also lead a team in Sussex?
Yes, I was also leading a team there. There is a group of people called the Sussex Energy Group, which is all about how to transition to a more sustainable energy system. And I was one of the co-directors of that group. So generally that sort of mixture of getting into exciting research projects, as well as doing some management. I was familiar with that beforehand, and I really enjoy that combination of working closely with people, trying to sort of help develop their careers, their thinking, skills, and then as well as getting deep into my own research topics. So I think that's a very fulfilling combination. I was also doing some teaching while I was at Sussex, which was brilliant because we developed a very specialized and small bespoke master's program for people who wanted to change energy systems and think about what energy policies, what innovation policies might be needed for that. So I immensely enjoy teaching students as part of that role, because all of them were really motivated to make a difference in the world, and were really looking to get new knowledge and new ideas and new skills to change the world. I think that's really the most exciting bit of being a teacher, to inspire other people, to pass on knowledge and discuss ideas with these students. Most of them, I mean, it was a master's program, so a lot of these students had gone after the first degree, got some work experience in different areas of work, and also different regions of the world. So also from our point of view, it's very exciting to meet with students, learn about their experiences, and then pass on some knowledge and discuss new ideas with them. So that's I really enjoyed that part of my job as well. Now I'm based at the research institute, as I said. So at the moment I'm not doing teaching directly.
Okay. So, do you miss it, teaching?
Yes, I missed the exchange in the classroom, if you know what I mean. So I always enjoy delivering lectures or getting into seminar settings with the students with lots of interesting debates, or we have seminars with external invited speakers and so on and so forth. So these are bits that I immensely enjoyed. Then there is the administrative side to teaching, of course, the marking, and that's less exciting.
Yeah, I get that. So, how is it different to be a researcher in a team or to be the kind of leader of the team of researchers?
Yes, so that's kind of at two different levels. I mean, I lead a team of 50 now, and there my responsibility is to make sure that the budget aligns, for example, so that we have enough research projects for everyone, that we have enough resources to do the work we do, to think about who's going to work on which project, to help apply for new funding, also sort of to discuss progress with people and their individual career trajectories and what skills they may need, strategies they should follow. That's one part of management. And then, of course, there's also the working directly in project teams, where I lead a team of researchers project is trying to answer a particular question. There, it's much more about sort of hands-on project management, making sure that the project delivers what it promised, writing texts, editing texts, doing presentations, going to conferences, and stakeholders. So it's a broad skill set for this kind of role.
The master that you created, how did you start about creating that, and what had to be in there to make it a good master?
Yeah. So generally in the UK system, a master's degree is a one-year course. So there's basically 2 terms of taught courses, and the term that is made for the dissertation. And this is kind of analogous to other master's programs offered across the university. So that's the general structure we followed there. And then it's pretty much was a case of my colleague Steve Sorrell and myself thinking about the core curricular content that we wanted to get across, and then thinking about how to combine that into individual bits of knowledge, modules with the credit structure so that it fits under the European ETS system and so on and so forth. So I mean, it really starts with what's the skills that we want people to develop. What kind of skills do people need to make a difference in terms of sustainable energy transitions? So that is what we started from, and of course, a lot of our students end up in a very broad variety of different careers. So when you set up a master's program, one of the core things to decide is first, in sort of terms of the intake, as it were. So what kind of degrees do people have to have as a first degree to qualify for this master's programs? But then even more importantly, to think about what is the skill set that we're trying to teach and develop in students, and what sort of careers will they be embarking on afterwards. That's normally a broad mixture. So many of our students have gone on to career in academia, so went on to do PhD, or went to a research institute or think tanks, but others have also gone more to the policy sector, work in public policy roles in governments around the world at different ministries, from energy to economy, for example. So it's then thinking about the skill sets and the knowledge that you need to, or that you'd like to convey. And in our case, it was really a combination of core content on energy policy. So, what is energy policy? What are the kind of instruments of energy policy? What are the goals of energy policy? How has this been evolving over the last 20, 30 years? And how is this new challenge of climate neutrality, reducing carbon emissions, how has that impacted on the energy sector and on energy policy? What are the goals and how we can translate that into policies? So that's one bit, it's the energy policy. But then there's the bit about innovation and technological change, which is obviously an important part of energy transitions. Sorry. That master's program was based at an institute called SPRU, Science and Technology Policy Research. So it's really one of the most well-known institutes for innovation, thinking about innovation and innovation policy in the world. So innovation is then the second real component that is also differentiates this master's program from other master programs, in the sense that, of course, you can sort of talk about energy and there's much excitement in the world around heating technologies and renewable energy technologies, but then there's a whole field of study called Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy, where people have been studying how new technologies are evolving, and what kind of public policy incentives are needed to diffuse these technologies. What are the social challenges of rolling out new technologies? What are the social solutions alongside the technologies? So that's a really important contributor. And then lastly, policy analysis, political science, to know about the political processes behind policies. So it's a combination of those three strands of research and scholarship that we teach our students.
So, what kind of skills does somebody then? How do you decide on the skills, and which kind of skills do you then focus on if you want them to go either into policy, into innovation, research, and academics? How do you decide what kind of skills are most important, and how do you teach them as well? Because I um I in my experience, universities haven't always focused on explaining us which skills they're teaching us, more on the knowledge that they're sharing with us. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that the skills are what you focus on?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. And I think that is true traditionally for most universities, most university courses. I think especially in the UK over the last decades or so, there has been more a drive towards um, making sure that there are sort of transferable skills taught, and also that these are made quite explicit to the students. And of course, there are, whatever role you end up with, there is a lot of background knowledge that's being taught and that you refer to sort of on these subject areas. But then I think there's a broad range of skills that are applicable in any of these roles, whether you go into public policy, whether you work in a think tank, or whether you work for advocacy NGO. And that is really to drill into the matter and ask critical questions. Is one of those skills, and ask, okay, so where's the data to support this? Where's the analysis? What was the methodology used to convey this policy message? I mean, this is an important skill, whether you're the policymaker or whether you're an advocacy role in an NGO, or whether you work in a think tank. So to critically assess materials, to summarize and synthesize materials and develop policy recommendations from that evidence, to even just to present. Sort of, if you work in a junior role in the ministry and you have a great new idea, but you're not able to summarize that in a policy paper of 2 or 3 pages to say, what's the problem that you're trying to solve, what's the recommendation that you have, and so on and so forth. So this is all things that we try to teach our students by designing it into the assessments. So, in the old days, people at universities, mainly were asked to write exams or author 50,000 word essays or something like that. And for example, in this policy analysis course, one of the deliverables was actually to work in a group, pick a particular policy problem, analyze the problem, find evidence, judge that evidence, see where it leads you, what kind of policy or solution might be recommended, and then writing that up in a policy brief and presenting that to a policymaker, aka the lecturer in this case. But that's a skill set that is applicable in a wide variety of roles. And so, yeah, I think the skill set that you want people to develop needs to be written into the assessments of a course like that.
And then, so the master is about sustainable energy systems or sustainable energy transitions. And that is one of the big topics in your own research as well, right?
That's right.
So, what is that about for people who don't know about it? How would you start to explain what it all means or what it all
Yes.
entails? Because I think that's a
Yes.
lot.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a fascinating area that I've been working on the last 15 years or so. And I think the core idea is fairly simple. The core idea is, okay, the way we produce and use energy at the moment is not sustainable. We have a variety of problems with starting from climate change, of course, the obvious one. Societies need to be carbon neutral by 2015 latest, which means that we're no longer emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. At the moment, 2/3 of the greenhouse gases that are being released into the atmosphere stem from the energy sector, from the way we produce and use energy. So that's anything from driving around in your car, to heating your home, to taking a shower, to plugging in your computer using just now. So all of these kind of core needs of society require energy to work. The question is, how do we produce and use that energy? So that's the question of, okay, we have an energy system now, and it works really well in many respects. Energy is readily available. It's not too expensive in many contexts, but it's detrimental for the climate. There are also some issues, social issues around energy poverty. For example, there's very poor households in the UK that have very high energy bills because they live in poorly insulated homes. So there are also a range of social issues that should be addressed. The idea is that an energy transition is basically a change in the way we meet our energy needs, and that this is a system change, that it's not about individual technologies that we can use or not use. It's not about a particular business model for an energy company. It's about all of these things together. The moment, as I said, the energy system works pretty well and it's well aligned, and there are policies to support all of these things, and there are regulations, and there are established economic sectors provide companies that provide these services, and all of that needs to change. And that's the idea of an energy transition. The question is then, how do we get from A to B? So how do we get from where we are now with our energy systems to more sustainable energy systems of the future? And the process of getting there is this transition. And the idea in my research, and also in that master's course that we were talking about, is really that transitions have happened in the past. So obviously, we haven't had electricity 200 years ago. So these things have happened in the past. There are historic processes. We also didn't rely on cars for our personal transport. People were living in cities. The main means of transport was walking around, cycling, or traveling by horse carriage. So clearly, these things have changed in the past, and they will change in the future. The question is, can we influence the direction in which this is changing so that we are moving to energy systems that are more sustainable? And the second challenge is, how quickly can we do this? So there's a lot of research in my area on energy transitions, looks at these processes historically. It says, well, this has happened, and these were the types of mechanisms that contributed to this change process. This is the time frame. And the overwhelming majority of these studies find that it's taken a long period of time, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. So the second policy challenge then really is to think about how we can speed up these processes so that we get it there a bit quicker. And because we know, we have the climate targets. The climate is not waiting for us to figure out what to do about the energy system. We need to change that now, and it can't take another 50 years.
But so you're in the situation, you want to transition from A to B, but do you know what B is? Like, is there, what is that vision that you're moving towards? Because right now everything, or almost everything, is on gas. Like, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna move to that vision? But also, what is that B that you're moving to?
Yes. No, that's a great question, and it's so funny that you said everything is on gas because you're based in the Netherlands, and for the Netherlands, that's absolutely true. So this is the first part of my response to your question. So the first question is really an assessment of where we are at with the energy system. There are huge variations. You say in the Netherlands, yes, it's all gas. And that is true. There are some renewables. But for example, Norway has a completely different profile, where the vast majority of their electricity is coming from hydro power. So that's a very sustainable solution. So, but at the same time, then they have, as do the Netherlands, an oil and gas industry, which is, of course, a big emitter of greenhouse gases on top of that. So my first response would be this. What is the status quo is very dissimilar across countries. So we need to look at, so what's the energy system actually like at the moment? One can think about the systems a little bit separately, to think about electricity. So where does the electricity come from? Where does the heat come from? And also then the transport sector is obviously one of the biggest energy users in most countries, plus the industrial sector. So it's a matter of assessing first the status quo, really thinking about, okay, where are the biggest sustainability problems? I think then the second is about the broad direction of travel. And I think that is clear broadly in most countries because of the Paris Agreement. So countries have signed up to these international targets, and they mean we need to radically reduce carbon emissions. So the future energy system has to be one which is carbon neutral in the long run. Okay, so that gives you a broad direction. And then, and this is the
Very
exciting,
broad one, though.
yes, and then, yeah, of course, and then we come to the exciting part, because this is also what my research is focusing on, because then there are many options within that category of carbon neutral. There are different technologies and pathways. We're talking about sort of pathways within transitions. And a lot of modeling work is being done on different scenarios and what technologies do you need, when, and how much of it, and so on and so forth. And this is incredibly contested within countries and across countries. So there are some countries, for example, the UK government a few years back had this idea of focusing on 3 core technologies. Offshore wind, which they have been very successful with in terms of building an industry and really rolling out gigawatts and gigawatts of offshore wind capacity. The second was nuclear, so a nuclear renaissance, so investing in your nuclear power stations, which is very controversial in other countries. And the third route was carbon capture and storage, so using fossil fuel technologies, whether it's gas or whether it's coal-fired power stations, but then sequestering the carbon, storing it in the ground. So that's one particular country which has these 3 different pathways that we're all supposed to contribute to that sustainable energy future. And then one can, take that at face value and look at the options and what's actually happened and what hasn't, and one can look at the politics. So as a research agenda, this is extremely exciting in terms of how are these things being played out. Because of course, there's all sorts of lobbying going on by different interest groups that want to see their pathway supported by policymakers, because at the end of the day, this is also about, of course, a lot of taxpayers' money that's being spent on these different options. So it's not just that it's within society, it's contested in the sense that, for example, the Netherlands, people have decided they do not want nuclear power, or at least no new nuclear power stations. The same in Germany, many other countries around the world, Sweden and others, where people have basically said, we don't want nuclear power to be part of the solution. And I think that's a fair choice by societies. But yeah, in other countries, they're going towards that more nuclear future. So that's one thing in terms of the supply side. And of course, then there is kind of also an issue around the demand side of things, because many scenarios sort of presume that energy use is going to continue to rise, which makes it more difficult for this transition process, because the quantity of energy you need overall is rising, and you need to replace the incumbent technologies with cleaner technologies. And of course, the bigger that cake gets, the more difficult that challenge becomes in terms of new investment, upscaling of production, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, some of the most radical energy scenarios are actually the ones that have much lower demand than is possible today. And that's interesting, because many countries do not, dwell on that too much, also governments and advocacy groups. But of course, that's one where it's really not just about new technologies. I mean, some energy efficiency can lead to reductions in energy use, sure, but it's mainly, or can be also about lower carbon lifestyles or lower carbon industrial structures.
What do you mean? So governments are now focusing on how to get more energy, but not on how to be more sustainable or how to use less energy actually per person in a
That's
country.
right. That's right. That's
Why?
true for most countries. Yes, because it's difficult. It's difficult politically to have a conversation about what is a good life and what do we need to live a good life. And does it include a weekend break in Barcelona? I think, in the current crisis situation, I think more people asking these questions. But, before the Corona crisis, I think most governments took it for granted that, you want people to have a choice, and we're free, sort of liberal democracies. So we leave it to the market, and if people want to use more energy, it's the job of the government to make sure that that energy is provided by the private sector. So it's not a question of discussing how people could use less energy beyond sort of campaigns, switch off the lights when you leave the room. Of course, that's not controversial, but it's also not a very effective policy strategy, I have to say.
So what would then be a policy strategy, or how could you do this in policy to make this a topic that people actually can and feel okay with talking about? Because it is live for a country, it is a personal choice, and it's your home and it's your behavior, and should the government affect that? So how do you approach this from policy perspective?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. But I think, the first I think the first step would be to acknowledge that that is the case. That, often modeling results are presented as this is the energy demand that we will have to meet in the future, and therefore we have to do X, right? And then there's an argument about how to meet that demand. So I think asking that question in the first place and saying, okay, what will demand be like, and why is it evolving in these ways? And can we have alternative scenarios where demand reduces significantly? I think is a first step to have a conversation about that. So what would that mean if energy demand would go down significantly? How could that be achieved? In which sectors of the economy are we using a lot of energy? And households are a major contributor to that. So that there's kind of, for me, there are two related discussions, but one is about the household sector itself. And this is, at the end, there are small margins to be made by encouraging energy efficiency. And, policymakers have leverage there. This point about choice. Okay, so, we had energy efficient light bulbs on the shelves in shops, and no one was buying them. And we were still using incandescent light bulbs, which use 5 times the energy of modern energy efficient light bulbs that we have now. And at some point, the European Union just said, okay, this hasn't been working. The technology is there. It's in the market. People can buy it. It's 5 times as efficient, but people didn't buy them because they didn't like the lighting color, or because they are more expensive. So the upfront investment was more. You were saving over the life of that light bulb. But initially it was more expensive than previous technology. So, there are reasons for then saying, okay, we take those off the shelves. It is no longer allowed to sell incandescent light bulbs in the European Union. That was a step that policymakers took, and say, okay, so that's a very small, discrete example. But, the question is that did that really affect people's quality of life? Is that really a thing of social well-being being undermined, that this choice is no longer available? But it was contested at the time. But it's a bit but it's a bit like the smoking ban. These things are often extremely controversial until they come in, people get used to them, and then they're not even being questioned anymore. So I think what I'm asking for is, first of all, to have a societal debate about that topic. How could we reduce our energy consumption? Does it really need to go up? What are lower carbon lifestyles that are actually desirable? Because I think that's, for me, that's the most important thing in this debate. It's about the question, what does a good life look like? And there are so many studies from around the world where it's actually not the material well-being after a certain point that matters for people's happiness. Of course, if you can't afford to buy food, if you can't afford to heat your home adequately, this is dreadful. And in those cases, you do have a need for maybe more energy services. But that's not where the majority of European consumers are. And for those people, then the question is, what does a good life look like? And most of the time, people will say, well, my material well-being is fine. I work very hard. I'm very busy, and I'd like more time to see friends and family. And so, the weekend trip to Barcelona, as nice as that may be, actually, if we think about it, isn't a top priority in life. So for me, I mean, it's one could even have this discussion in terms of the obsession with economic growth, because that's the second part which drives this these modeling results. Almost always these models assume a certain growth rate of 1.5% or whatever per year after year, and therefore the energy that needs to be produced is growing and growing and growing. And if we take both of these factors seriously and say, well, but maybe there is lower carbon lifestyles that would make people more happy than they currently are. And then it's the same with growth. I mean, there have been many reports, there have been very clever economists writing about, for example, prosperity without growth is a famous book. So, is it really meeting societal needs to have more economic growth?
I want to talk about that in a bit, but
Okay,
first,
great.
I'm really curious. So, how can a household or a person, because there is all this research and there is all this campaigning about like sustainability and climate and carbon neutrality, but how can a household or a person that is like, I want to contribute to a more sustainable society, but I don't know where to start. There are all these people saying these big things, having these big ideas, but I'm just one person. Where do I start and what can I do?
No, that's a really good question. And my answer to that is that that's one of the reasons why this transition perspective is very exciting to me, because it takes the energy system as a system into consideration. So that includes people, that includes demand, but it basically says we need a whole system change. It's not just the choices people make in the supermarket when they buy a new light bulb. That's an important part, but that's a small contribution. So yes, you go and you buy the latest generation of energy-efficient light bulb, and when your fridge breaks, you buy a new fridge and you make sure it's AAA rated and it's very energy efficient. So that's fine. These are things where you can have a direct influence on your own demand. The second stage is then, of course, in using these products and switching off the light when you leave the room, not setting your temperature in your fridge to 2 degrees, not heating your flat to 22 degrees when you're at home and when you're at work all day or night. So there are all sorts of behavioral issues that people can have an influence over their consumption. But I think the bigger thing is that actually we need a system change. If you think about the energy system so far, it's very much focused on large-scale installations, large-scale power plants that are supplying electricity to households or industries, often far away from where the energy is produced. Which means that you need quite a large infrastructure in terms of transmission infrastructure, which is an economic cost. And you also need a distribution network to connect them to individual households. And you have transmission losses in that process. And this, is an engineering choice that was based on economics, because large-scale production of electricity in centralized power stations is more efficient economically for the company supplying it. That isn't God-given. So I think now, what does the future of an electricity system look like? I mean, in many countries around the world, people are going towards smaller scale, decentralized energy systems, electricity systems that are supplied by renewables. And there are consumers.
Does that mean like for a village or for a street or a
I'll come to that. So it's
okay.
But the basic idea is that energy or electricity in this case is produced decentrally. So for example, coming back to the householder and what you can do. I mean, one of the ways in which renewable energy has been spreading around Europe is by people investing in local energy co-ops. So,
What are those?
a farmer provides land, and they put on a wind turbine, and a bunch of people that get together and make that investment together. The farmer provides the land, you buy the technology, and you produce your electricity and you feed that into the grid. And so that's a local energy cooperative. This model has been extremely popular in Germany. It has overcome many of the problems of social acceptability that some other countries were facing. This was initially pioneered also in Denmark. So Denmark and Germany are two countries where this has really taken off, or where a bunch of farmers get together and invest together in some wind turbines on some of their land. Or a community gets together and invests in putting solar PV on the roof of a school or on the roof of a local church. And that's just a way in which people can be part of that renewable energy revolution, which they can also financially benefit, because with the subsidies provided by the government, these investments were also quite profitable, especially at times like this, where you have very low interest rates provided by other sort of saving opportunities. So this is actually economically a very interesting possibility. It's just not, the energy system wasn't set up for that. It was set up for the large companies sharing the market and delivering it to the consumers, and the consumers being passive and buying this electricity. But now, I mean, the next step of that, so that's that one model of local cooperatives. There's also, of course, the practice of what we now call prosuming. So if you own a house, you could put solar on your roof, and you can use that solar energy directly to power your appliances, your washing machine, your dishwasher, charge your mobile, charge your laptop, and then sell the excess electricity where you produce too much, which you don't use, to the grid.
Again, sell your electricity that you don't use to the grid. Okay.
Yes. Again, it takes a lot of tweaking to make that work technically, but also in terms of the financial rewards for that. How much are you going to get paid for that electricity, and so on and so forth. But it has huge economic advantages in terms of not needing to invest that much in transmission infrastructure, because you're not transmitting electricity over long distances from central power stations. It's much more localized. And to answer your question earlier, this doesn't mean that we're sort of ripping out cables and that there are sort of energy islands and a small village is completely independent and does not have any need to sometimes also import electricity from other places. That's not what it means. It's not an autarky kind of system. Things are still connected up, because as we know, renewable energy is quite variable. For example, at night, you don't produce a lot with a solar panel, but the wind might be blowing quite a lot at night. And so it's still a system where everything is connected up into one grid, but sort of how the load within that grid is managed and how where the electricity is produced is changing significantly. And as I said, so you can do little things on your own demand side, but you can also be part of that revolution by investing in an energy co-op, or by putting solar onto your roof, or by investing into a heat pump to supply your heat. So there are, and then maybe last point about this, which I was always telling my students, the idea in energy policy and energy policy debates is always about people as consumers. So the consumers want choice, and the consumers shouldn't pay high prices. But at the end of the day, we're not just consumers, we're also citizens. So if you think that climate change is a problem, and that it makes sense that the German or the Dutch government signed up to the Paris Agreement, and that they now committed to reducing carbon emissions to zero, then it's also up for us as citizens to campaign and to take political parties to task with that and say, look, you've signed this. Tell us what you're planning to get us there, because at the moment we're not on a trajectory to get us there. So what are your policy proposals to get us back on track? And vote and campaign on that basis. So that's also something households can do, and is an important part of that change process.
But how or where does this then get stuck often? Because I do know that, for example, the Dutch government they are in the Paris Agreement. They want to reach that, and they are building all these like sustainable like solar parks, windmill parks. But then an international company comes in and takes all that energy that was supposed to go to households, and then uses it for their like technological like what they need for their energy, and then they can say they're sustainable, but it doesn't actually go to the Dutch households. So where in the process does it often go wrong or go that it stops working, kind of?
Well, in the sense of stops working, I mean, the Netherlands, as far as I know, has extremely stable supply. So in that sense, there isn't a case of it stopping. In the same sense, I'm not making a joke. It's a serious point because, of course, in many developing countries, energy access is an issue. And there's a huge challenge about electrification of rural places in many countries. And there are some countries that have made huge progress in connecting up villages and getting modern energy services to people. So it's not at that level that we're talking about. So there is service. So that's why I wasn't quite aware of what you were talking about in terms of companies taking for themselves and not providing it to the consumers, because you do have electricity and you do not have blackouts. So in that sense, demand is being met, which is, of course, for energy policymakers, that's one of the key priorities, energy security. So we have to have a system where people flick on the switch of light and the light comes on 24/7, whole year round. And we have that in many European countries, but not so much in other parts of the world, which is why it's an important policy agenda. Because our course was, of course, also this reach is of course global. So of course there are major issues with that. So that's not a problem so much in the Netherlands and many parts of the European community. There are problems in terms of access of energy service. I mean, the cost of it for certain disadvantaged consumers, energy poverty.
So how does this, is it now for developing countries, is it easier to transition straight into sustainable energy, or is it that they also go into gas and then they try to get into sustainable energy? Is there a different path for them than there was in the past?
That's another great question. Yes, so there has been a huge debate in the past about whether there are sort of stages of development, and countries would go from a very wood-based rural economy where people use wood as a cooking fuel, very dirty and so on and so forth, and maybe kerosene lamps for lighting. And then you sort of upgrade to a modern fossil fuel-based industry structure where you supply electricity, where you can also use electricity for heat or something, and then transition away from fossil fuels. And this is kind of a sort of catching up trajectory. And you could say that that was the case in many developing countries such as China, where that has taken that trajectory, that basically followed the Western model, and now built huge world's biggest capacity of coal-fired power station to power their rise of energy use. And I think nowadays the second strategy is much more relevant, which is kind of the idea of leapfrogging. That it's not about catching up with sort of some of the industrialized countries, but that if you are building a new infrastructure in terms of electrification, for example, from scratch nowadays, you would not go to fossil fuels. I mean, renewables have, over the last 10 years, have become so much cheaper and are now, in many cases, more competitive than the fossil fuel alternatives. So there's still countries, of course, around the world that also invest in coal and so on and so forth, but especially for rural electrification programs, some form of investment in renewables, whether that's biogas, whether that's onshore wind, or whether that's solar, makes a lot of sense. So I think we're now seeing countries move towards more the second strategy of leapfrogging, basically skipping that phase of very heavily industrialized fossil fuel electricity production towards a more decentralized renewables-based system, which is what we were trying to do. as well.
So what are the advantages or disadvantages of either having a working electricity system and now having the shift to a different kind of electricity, or not having it all set up and then moving into one system that's immediately sustainable? Which one would you prefer? And
Yeah, well,
why?
yeah, well, in a sense, it's not a
It's
question
not about
of
preference.
preference.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, in the traditional way, we talk a lot about path dependence, okay, which
Mm.
is sort of the past trajectory is shaping where you can go in the future. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting, but in terms of the historical record on this, in terms of energy transitions, you know, for example, the transition based to coal, where basically coal was used in the UK and the Industrial Revolution for all sorts of applications, also in industries as a source for heat and production processes, as well as for electricity. So coal was for everything. And the UK was one of the first countries to really roll out that technology. And there's interesting historical studies that show that if you're a front runner in this, you're most wedded to it, and it's most difficult to get out. And yeah, it takes longer than for other countries. And partly that, of course, has to do with economic interests and capabilities. If you're a front runner in something and you become a world leader in this will be good business because you'll be exporting that technology. Those companies, you know, will have international markets to sell to. They become big, they become powerful, they become very important to deliver that service in a particular country. And therefore, you know, in terms of negotiating with governments, have many arguments in their favor. You know, we're producing X, you know, euros of wealth in the country. We have X number of thousand employees in your country. You really don't want to do something that threatens our business model. Because we're big and we're important. So that, in a sense, can be a disadvantage. At the same time, for this leapfrogging strategy, then the question is, of course, where does the skills, where do the technologies come from? You know, do you have to develop them from scratch? Is there something you can import from somewhere else? If it's new and still expensive, that's difficult. So there are all sorts of interesting processes and questions to think about.
So we also talked about economic growth a bit, but what is it about economic growth that keeps us all focused on it? And are there other ways of maybe going forward that's not economic growth, but maybe other? Do we need to focus on growth? Do we need to focus on something else? How do you look at that?
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is a long-standing debate, at least since the 1970s, with the famous report for the Club of Rome, The Limits to Growth, that was published in 1972. So it's been a long time raging, this debate. And I mean, for me, as someone who's interested in sustainability, I think one of the problems with the growth obsession is, as I sort of hinted at earlier, that policymakers are so focused on that one metric. And basically, you know, when there is a doubt about whether a particular environmental policy, for example, is going to have a negative impact on growth, policymakers become extremely cautious. So for me, in a sense, if we're serious about this sustainability discussion, if we're serious about really radical environmental policies in order to meet our global challenges, then growth becomes an obstacle in the sense that it prevents people from doing the right thing because they say, oh, no, but we can't do that because of growth. We can't interfere with growth. And I think we really need to turn this around, not thinking about we cannot do certain environmental policies because it will undermine growth. Because, I mean, the logic is the other way around. We need to preserve a planet that we as human beings can live on.
We kind of need it.
Because we kind of need it. You know, this is the slogan that they show in these demonstrations. There is no planet B. So exactly. So we need to make it work on this planet. And I mean, economic theories don't talk about that as much. only with sort of environmental economics, people started to take this a little bit more serious, that actually even the economy, all functions of the economy depend on the natural environment in terms of energy input, in terms of resource input, in terms of climate services, oxygen we breathe, that's partly produced by the trees around us. If we chop down all the trees, so we as human beings depend on the natural environment to support us. And so we need to make sure that we're not undermining that to an extent that it becomes not possible to live a decent life on this planet anymore. And then the question is, okay, so if that's the perspective, if it's about, okay, we need to reach these environmental targets, then what is growth for? Or what is it actually? Because I mean, your question was, why is it so important? Well, it is a very simple metric where you can have a number which you have available globally for each and every country every year. And you can compare and you can say, great, we grew 1.8%. That's much better than country B that only grew 1.2%. So it's an immediate sort of metric of success of policymakers and of the competitiveness of the economy. Task is always to grow and to grow more than others. So it's relative gains that really matter in terms of this logic. And policymakers are extremely wedded to the idea that this increases well-being. And in one sense, this is true. It's meant to measure economic throughput. And it's often equated with employment. And of course, it is the case that if you have very high growth rates, we often see an uptake in employment numbers. And of course, you could say, well, that is pretty important. We want people to have jobs. And that's why recession immediately becomes a problem, and why we are seeing all these stimulus programs now, why the European has this green growth agenda and so on and so forth with the European Green Deal, is exactly for that reason. Oh dear, we're in an economic crisis, and now people are losing their jobs. So we need to create growth so that more people can find employment. And that is, of course, important. We do want people to have jobs. The question is, I mean, it's partly one of also distributional effects. So what we've seen in the labor market, of course, in the last decades was a huge sort of disparity emerging between people on low pay salaries and then people on top of the hierarchy in big companies earning, many times the salaries of normal employees. So in a sense, it's more of a, in my view, it's more of a distributional issue about, it's not, we want a productive economy, we want an efficient economy, but this idea of trickling down, that if the economy grows, everyone will benefit from it, and over time we manage to get rid of social inequalities, or at least to narrow them. I think it's really not borne out by reality. There's been a lot of criticism of that in the economic literature over decades now, to say, well, actually, no, it doesn't. And there's also a lot of studies that show that it's actually not so much the absolute wealth people have, but it's relative compared to others. So if you're a little bit better off, but your colleague is much better off, then you're not really happy. You're not happy that you're a little bit better off, because you perceive it as unfair, because someone else has benefited even more from that development. So it's really interesting in terms of how also sort of social psychology plays into this, and what does make people happy. And there's been a long debate about, okay, it's pretty accepted, I think, that growth in itself as a metric isn't a very good indicator. But it is simple, it is one number, and therefore it's stuck with policymakers, because all the alternatives about, oh, we need to measure social well-being, you get into huge fights about what are appropriate metrics, how can it be measured, and how can different dimensions be compared? Because that's the thing about, you know, the growth thing. You add up all the activities in the economy in euros, and you have a number, and you compare it to the number last year, and you say, great, we grew by 1.2%. But how do you, you know, compare X number of people having not having cancer with X number of people now having to spend 10% of their income on energy services? You know, these are not comparable. And I think so that it's both the obsession with the current metric, but also the weakness in the sense of the alternative ways of measuring welfare or social well-being that makes it easier just to stick with the existing model.
So how do we work with that? Because is it then better to completely change to a different one, or is there, like you said, green growth, or another? Do we need to switch to another type of measuring growth in money, or do we need to just stop comparing? Is that a way, or we need a separate measure next to it about well-being next to economy? What is the best, or what is the strategy to go forward with that?
Yeah, I think one of the problems is that there is not a broad agreement. So I'll give you my version of this.
Sounds
good. So I think in this debate, what has happened over the last decades was really that there are two different camps. One is the green growth camp that says growth is not a problem. Growth is fine as long as we manage to minimize the impacts on the environment. And the trick there is decoupling. Sort of we decouple economic activity from environmental destruction. So they say, well, it's not a problem if we use more energy in the future as long as that energy is produced sustainably, so zero carbon. If that's the case, it's fine, and you can grow your economic output at the same time as meeting environmental targets. So that's the kind of the green growth position. And so the question then is one of governments incentivizing growth in directions that are more sustainable. So this is what the European Union is doing at the moment with the European Green Deal, to say, okay, we are now in a recession. You know, many countries are hard hit by the corona crisis, and we need to create new growth, and we want to create growth in areas that are suitable for the environment. For example, renewable energy, investing in circular economy model, and so on and so forth. So that's the green growth agenda. Then there's the degrowth agenda that says, actually, there's no empirical evidence whatsoever that we will be able to do this decoupling. This hasn't occurred. Where it has occurred is, for example, okay, so the UK or Germany managed to decrease their carbon footprint, but they've partly done so by outsourcing industrial production to countries such as China. Then, you know, the CO2 emissions associated with the production processes of these products are actually China's problem and feature in their emissions accounting. And now we, as Germany, have become cleaner. So they say, well, this doesn't make any sense. It's about, you know, globally saving the planet. So what we need to do is to really constrain material and energy throughput overall, globally. And therefore, we need to stop this growth obsession. And what colleagues at the Institute have been doing over the last couple of years in a project that was funded by the German Environment Ministry, by the German Environment Agency, was to say, okay, well, let's look at the evidence for those two positions, because partly policy debate doesn't move forward because there are proponents of both of these camps. They have mutually exclusive assumptions about how the world works, and policymakers, you know, get shouted at from both camps and end up not doing very much because they, or siding with the green growth agenda, as an example of the year. So what my colleagues have been trying to do in this report is to say, okay, let's look at the evidence for both of these positions, and can we actually say that either of these positions is a good guide to policymaking? And what they found, they've done an extremely comprehensive review of evidence, and often there are no sort of empirical studies. There's also often more modeling or theoretically guided analyses on why this can or cannot be done. And they actually found that both positions aren't really able to support their claims by evidence, and therefore concluded at the end of the day that we're not sure whether this absolute decoupling is possible. And in line with an accepted principle in environmental policy, which is called the precautionary principle, which means if there is a chance that something is very harmful, we ought to be doing something about it, even though we're not sure it will occur or it will be problematic. But so in line with this principle, my colleagues were suggesting, well, let's move away from this discussion, growth, no growth. Let's move to a model where we're not dependent on growth. So they call this the precautionary post-growth approach, which basically is saying, okay, we're a bit agnostic about this issue, but we are sure that we haven't seen enough evidence of absolute decoupling being possible, and therefore we should adjust our policies to steer our economy in a direction where we are less dependent on growth, so that if this decoupling isn't possible in the long run, we're not dependent on it. So it doesn't have very difficult social consequences. And this sounds very abstract, and I see you being a bit puzzled, but it has really demanding implications for policymakers. So one is, okay, we don't really need programs that fund growth per se. What we really need to do is to explore ways of economic organization which are not depending so much on growth. And secondly, we really need to figure out a way to fund our welfare states that are not dependent so much on growth.
What do you mean with that?
Well, at the moment, in many European countries, for example, your pension or your healthcare is funded through contributions through your employment.
Yeah.
Right? So if you don't have employment or you only take a part-time job, you really suffer at old age. And if you invest in a private pension, capital-based pensions, it's also, that you save money, and that money is invested somewhere. And what you want is returns on that investment, so that you grow that money to support you when you're older and no longer have income. And therefore, you're investing it somewhere where it grows. Okay? Yeah. So that's a capital-based pension system. That's problematic. If you have a very, for example, in the UK, I lived 12 years of my life in the UK. So there the system is that you have an extremely small state pension and something which you cannot really live on. So what you have to do is to invest in a private pension. There are all sorts of possibilities of doing that. But if you go to the capital market and you invest capital somewhere, you are fueling growth. The German system for pensions is different. It's paid by contributions. So the people who are drawing a pension now, this is not a pile of money that they saved somewhere and that sits somewhere in a bank or an investment scheme. This is money that is being paid right now by people like myself who work. So the problem with that system is when societies age and you have fewer young people paying into the system and more older people. So it's not the solution, but I'm just saying the difference between those systems in terms of how dependent they are on growth being there and growth being high is very different. So I think that's some of the nitty-gritty that policymakers need to get into to think about how we can actually structure pension systems that enable us to also live well when we're old without having big economic growth between now and then.
So I was wondering, I've been trying to figure out what happens if we stop growing as an economy. What happens if we stop focusing on growth and we either find something else to focus on or we move our perspective somewhere else? What would happen to an economy if they stop growing?
Yeah. I mean, one of the concerns is with this idea of stopping growing is, as I said, is about employment and what do people work. I mean, in a sense, already now, there are huge problems with unemployment in many European countries. And then it's temporarily a little bit better when there is a higher growth phase. And then there is, it is a bit worse if there's an economic crisis. So it's a very volatile system. And it doesn't mean that people are 100% employed at all times. Actually, there is a percentage of the population that find it very difficult to participate in that. So, I mean, one of the ideas in this degrowth academic community and also sort of NGO world that are proposing this is the idea of a universal basic income. And I'm not sure that's the solution. I just want to sort of suggest it here that it merits more debate. That, you know, we have a lot of people who have jobs that are not well paid and that they don't like, and where they really don't receive a lot of satisfaction from doing this job. And so in a world where you have universal basic income, let's say 1,200 euros everyone gets, and you can live off that, not particularly comfortably, but it's enough to meet your basic needs. And then the question is, okay, so what would people like to do in addition to that? So their basic needs are met. If you want to have more material welfare, if you want, you need to work. But maybe there are people happy with that. I mean, a lot of people working in the arts, for example, they don't make a lot of money with the current economic system. And maybe that's also not their main driver. Maybe their main driver is to create art that is seen by thousands of people, and that makes them very happy. So, yeah, I'm just saying that this is one of the things that one can think about, because it's also that there are certain jobs that need to be done. I mean, we will still need plumbers that, you know, clear out your system if there is
people to pick up the trash.
People to pick up the trash. And probably what would happen in this economy is that these jobs would need to be paid much better, so that people decide to take them up. They're not forced by economic necessity. And also, if you already have sort of your basic needs met and it's really an additional income from your job, I think people will be more choosy about what it is they do, but also how much they work. You know, coming back to this point I made earlier about, you know, what do people actually, what makes them happy? And then people say, I'm too busy. I would really like to have more time to spend with family and friends. And I think, I mean, for some people, that is sort of the vision of a no growth or low growth economy, is really that, you know, you have your material needs met, but you have more time for yourself. You're not in this rat race where you're trying to get the next promotion and work even harder and working harder to be promoted, to earn more money, to then be able to buy a status symbol. Like in the Netherlands, I mean, as in Germany, people are very obsessed with their cars and spend huge amounts on having cars that drive them around, mostly sit in traffic, or not drive. I mean, sitting in front of the house or the workplace, and people spend a lot of money on that, and it sustains a whole industry. So in that sense, you can say, well, that's great for the German economy, and you know, we're exporting a lot of cars, so that's a very successful economic sector. But at the end of the day, the whole business model is predicated on the idea that I need to show my neighbor that I earn a lot of money, and therefore I buy a big car to show that to everyone. Is that really the essence of happiness? I need to move around. I want to be able to be mobile, sure, but is a car that costs 50 or 70,000 euros really the right means of getting there? Probably not. And so I think that's also, you know, when we talked about lifestyle changes early on, it has a lot to do also with culture and what it is that is seen to be important. And it is important to get from A to B, but you can do that by bike, you can do that by public transport, you can have new kind of light weight vehicle, maybe electric vehicles. Sort of there are all sorts of options of how to get around, but to work very hard So you can spend a lot of money on a product that you don't really need, or at least not that specification of product, is, in my view, not really a sensible way of organizing things. But that's where we are at the moment. And yeah, I think.
Do you think this is changing with new generations, that they care about different things, or they care less about material things?
I think so. I think especially with car ownership, that is a generational development, where people are now less inclined. I mean, if you look at the statistics, for example, for what percentage of the population is making a driving license, get a test and the license, and that percentage, at least in Germany, has been going down over the years, which is suggesting that people are considering this and think, well, I don't really need to drive. There are other ways of getting from A to B. And yeah, also this issue of the car being such an important status symbol. I think in the post-war period, this is where this emerged, the car as a status symbol. And unfortunately, this is also, of course, something that's spread globally. So it's not just, the aspiration of people in Western European countries and North America, but across the world. But I think, yeah, in Europe, in many countries, this is actually going back in terms of desire to own a car, or at least to spend much money on sort of a big, expensive car to show off. I think it's going down significantly. I think young people are much more pragmatic. I think young people are also, in a sense, more sort of tech savvy. And for example, car rental schemes, you have an app, you book a car. Why do you need to own one? I think that model of individual car ownership, that ton of steel that sits in your driveway and costs you 70,000 euros, that I think is a model of the past. And I think, yes, I think there is a generational shift happening, which is very welcome.
Well, with every guest, we do a lightning round. And I basically ask a question and you just say the first thing that comes up. Okay?
Great.
All right. What is a skill any economist should learn?
Interpret the data.
Who do you admire or look up to in economics?
Schumpeter.
What is a question you want me to ask that I haven't asked you yet?
Pass.
Nice. Where can people find you, or the things that you're most enthusiastic about if they want to learn more?
Yeah, find the Institute, find our website, and read about all the exciting research that we do.
Okay. So what does a culture of sustainability look like?
Difficult question.
According to you.
Yeah, a culture of sustainability is one where we have managed to close material and energy loops towards a circular economy.
Okay. And then final question, what is your advice to future economists?
Think hard, explore things beyond the neoclassical mainstream, and study hard, and have a commitment to making the world a better place.
All right. Florian, thank you so much for making the time to talk to me.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.